Welcome to World Today. I'm Amrit Pal Singh. This is a show on which we talk about what happened around the world in the day just gone by. It's your daily window to the world. Over the next 1 hour, we'll talk about how the situation is changing in Afghanistan as we speak. The Taliban claims Panjshir has fallen, while the resistance forces have rubbished that claim, saying that they still occupy strategic heights. So amid counterclaims and claims, the tug of war for power and the jostling for power continues in Afghanistan. While there's still no government in sight, we could expect the Taliban to announce a government this week. But till now, Taliban has twice postponed the formation of a government that talks about the fissures within the Taliban. We'll talk about all that and much more over the next 1 hour. Let's begin with the headlines we're tracking at this hour. Taliban claims full control of Panjshir Valley. Opposition National Resistance Force Front rejects Taliban's victory claim, says it's still present in strategic positions, asserts that struggle against the Taliban will continue. Torrential rains, floods and tornadoes finally end in the United States after a week. Authorities say over 480,000 homes are still without power, over 600,000 customers struggling in dangerous heat. The world battles COVID-19, over 22.16 crore people infected with the virus, more than 19.81 crore recovered till date. Worldwide, deadly virus claims over 45.84 lakh lives. The United States is witnessing a spike in the new daily COVID-19 cases. England, Poland and Germany score big wins in the World Cup qualifiers. Wales beats Belarus with a hat-trick from Gareth Bale to keep their World Cup qualification hopes alive. Let's begin with the big news we are tracking at this hour. The Taliban today claimed victory over the Panjshir Valley. The claim was disputed by the National Resistance Force of Afghanistan, which is leading the fight in the province and is claims to be still continuing the fight. They say they are in possession of the strategic heights in Panjshir. Taliban spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid has said that the victory had completed their takeover of the country.
Taliban claimed victory on Monday over opposition forces in the Panjshir Valley northeast of Kabul, declaring that it completed the Islamist group's takeover of Afghanistan and promising to announce a new government soon. The Taliban spokesperson called for unity.
Those who cause unrest and insecurity and those who are doing things that paved the way for war, the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan is very sensitive in these cases and will never allow activities against the system and the people of Afghanistan and our interests. The withdrawal of foreign troops was the pride of all our people. We wish that this time, after the end of the occupation, Afghanistan is a completely safe, stable and prosperous home. We came to Kabul with the same intention and we wish for our nation to cooperate with God's help.
But resistance fighters said that they were still present in all strategic positions and continue to fight. In the midst of all this, 2 Afghan women who led protests in Kabul a day earlier say their only goal is to maintain the same hard-won rights that they had before the Taliban takeover. Poet and activist Huda Khamosh said most women feared losing access to education and work.
We just want the same rights as men or the same concessions that we had under the government of Ashraf Ghani. We want to have rights under the Taliban government also. If not at 100%, if not at 80%, then at least 50% should be given to us. Our freedom is not how we dress. We weren't walking around without a hijab before either. We dressed and lived according to the teachings of Islam. Our freedom is in being educated. Our freedom is in taking part in politics, taking part in economic activity, to work, to study and to progress.
Meanwhile, Pakistan's ISI chief Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid flew to Kabul on an unannounced visit for what reports said was to discuss government formation in Afghanistan, even as the Taliban deferred the announcement for a second time since taking over. Reports say the Taliban have sent out invitations to several countries, including Pakistan, China and Russia, to attend the ceremony of the new government formation in Afghanistan. Notably, these three are among the very few countries still operating their embassies in the country that has been taken over by the insurgents. United Nations Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator Martin Griffiths met the Taliban's co-founder Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar on Sunday. The photograph from the meeting was published by the Taliban. Martin Griffiths also tweeted an image from the meeting and said he met with the leadership of the Taliban to reaffirm UN's commitment to deliver impartial humanitarian assistance and protection to millions in need in Afghanistan. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has departed for Doha, Qatar and Ramstein, Germany. Before embarking, he tweeted that the visit would provide him the opportunity to thank Qatari and German friends in person for the outstanding support that they had given to safely transit US citizens, Afghans and other evacuees from Afghanistan. Around 200 protesters rallied in the center of Paris to voice their support for Afghan women. Thousands of evacuated Afghans are waiting in transit hubs in third countries such as Qatar, Germany and Italy. Thousands of others are trying to leave via land crossings and neighboring countries such as Pakistan. With Bureau Inputs, World Today Desk, DD India.
And let's now, I'm joined on the show by my colleague Ravi Dhiman for more on that story. Ravi, to you first. Also, I'm joined by Prabhu Dayal, former ambassador, and we'll talk to our guests. But let me first go across to Ravi. Ravi, give us a sense of what are the latest reports you are picking between claims and counterclaims of Panjshir having fallen. What is the latest that you're picking up on that?
As you said, Amrit, we are getting counterclaims and claims by Taliban and the resistance front. Taliban has been claiming that they have now captured Panjshir. The entire country of Afghanistan is under their firm control. To support their claims, they have also released videos of Taliban fighters hoisting the Taliban flag at the governor's house in Panjshir. And on the other hand, the front resistance front says that they are still in the fight. They are at some crucial peaks. They are occupying crucial heights in the valley, and the fight will go on. Nevertheless, the Taliban seems to be convinced, their spokesperson seems to be convinced that they have, in fact, won Panjshir, and the entire country is now under their firm control.
Right now is the position of Ahmad Masood. Where is Ahmad Masood? Any reports on that?
I'm on TV.
There have been conflicting claims about Ahmad Masood's presence and his disappearance to the neighboring country of Tajikistan. But Ahmad Masood and all of the fighters, including former Vice President Amrullah Saleh, they claim that they are still there and the fight will go on. But exact locations and where are they, whether they are inside Afghanistan or outside Afghanistan is not clear as yet. But what we can say with certainty is that Ahmad Masood is carrying on. He has not accepted the defeat. He has not surrendered to the Taliban. And he says that the fight will go on.
But what is your sense, Ravi? Is it just a matter of time, even if Panjshir hasn't fallen till now? Is it just a matter of time that Taliban will take over Panjshir?
Well, the videos that Taliban have released, the videos they claim to be near the governor's house in Panjshir, and that has not been, debated. That has not been contested by the front. So it shows that they have made some inroads. And the crucial difference now, according to the National Resistance Front, is that the Pakistan Air Force was also abetting and assisting the Taliban fighters on ground, something which Iran has also raised concerns on. And once you have valid air support, once you have air artillery support to support your fighters on the ground, the situation changes dramatically. In strategic terms, air support can, destroy.
That's a very
and
interesting
distance
point that
and
you make,
can
Ravi.
take,
That's a very interesting point that you, Ravi. What is the source of these reports? Who is saying that Pakistan Air Force was used?
What we are hearing is that Iran has accused Pakistan of using its air assets in the war against the Panjshir fighters, and they've raised concern that if another country comes into these fight between the Afghan people, then it will have repercussions. And also conflicting reports are being aired from various news channels saying that the Pakistani Air Force had an active part in these battles. Obviously, they have to be verified, but right now, all the neighbors, including Iran, have voiced their support, voiced their concern at these developments. Also, Amrullah Saleh, on their behalf, and Ahmed Masood have been, accusing Pakistan of collaborating with the Taliban against them.
Okay, Ravi, request you to stay on. Let me introduce my other guests. I have with me Prabhu Dayal, former senior diplomat, and I also have with me Major General retired Sanjay Meston. He was a former defense attaché in Afghanistan of India. Let me first come to you, Ambassador. What do you make of the reports coming in that Pakistan might have lent air support to the Taliban in its fights against the National Resistance Force?
Well, Amrit, I have seen these reports and I'm inclined to believe them because the Pakistani government has pitched totally along with the Taliban. It is beyond doubt that the ISI is involved in what is happening in Afghanistan. And there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that the Pakistanis it never possible to help the Taliban to take full control of the situation in Afghanistan. So, if you ask me about these reports, well, I've been watching developments unfold, and it is beyond doubt that the Pakistanis have actually become directly involved in this conflict in Afghanistan.
Okay. Let me bring in General Meston. General Meston, what is your sense? What is the ISI, DG ISI doing in Kabul?
See, my reports emanated today early morning, and it is highly confirmed. See, I have got a lot of Afghan friends from all ethnicities.
Okay.
They are inside Panjshir and some are in and around Panjshir.
Okay.
They have clearly heard the aircrafts, the flying of the air. Now I will prove it to you.
Yes, sir. I can hear you. Please carry on.
That since last many days, we have been hearing that Taliban has controlled Panjshir, and first time they showed, that some of their troops were in and around the valley close to the river, which was a totally false claim because I have myself been to that location and this area was totally different. So their lives were exposed there. After that, again, we have been hearing that Taliban has been attacking every day and they have been making a lot of gains. But the fact of the matter was, many Taliban soldiers had surrendered and many were captured and many were killed. And they were losing very heavily. And therefore, this became, obviously, I had highlighted in many other channels also, this was a tough nut to crack. So what they have resorted, that the Pakistan ISI chief came the other day. He spent a lot of time, and therefore the Air Force was activated. The attack helicopters and even the drones, etc., were activated. During this time, he has taken as a intelligence at the head of the ISI, the accurate targets, where were the hideouts, where were the people concentrated, and all those kind of things.
Okay.
Can you believe Amrullah Saleh's house has been targeted specifically?
Okay.
I've been to his house.
Okay.
His house has been targeted. So this southern area, the southern entry to Panchshir Valley, that area has now certainly been captured. And last week what has happened because of the sudden airstrikes. Now, these are not permanent defenses. They are just people who keep changing their positions. They have some small hideout, from there they fire, because they always fire from a vantage point where they are dominating the enemy. So therefore they require a lot of different positions.
Right.
Now, once these people are open, the defenders, obviously airstrikes have a tremendous impact on the people who are defending, and therefore they have suffered huge casualties, including they have lost one of the major generals whom I knew very well, and thus they have lost the Panchshir, who was the spokesman.
Okay,
Casualties
yes.
have been there, and besides this, there have been many casualties of the Panchshiri soldiers. Now, Ahmad Masood and Amrullah Saleh are safe. So what they have done is, now they have regrouped and they have gone little further back toward the northern side of the Panchshir Valley.
Okay.
So the Pakistan involvement has been 100% proved. Their SSG battalions were involved. Just 2 days before, when killing reports were there, they have shown the ID cards also of the Pakistani soldiers. So it is a well coordinated attack by the Pakistani Air Force and the Pakistani SSG. And
Okay.
the purpose of this ISI was there. ISI chief has no business to start coming to a country to start reconciling on government formation. Is that his role? He is not a political head. I would have understood if there was the foreign minister of Pakistan. But what is the ISI chief got? And he is hugging all these people. It was basically targeting these Panchshiris over there. That was the aim. And now let me also tell you, Pakistan is directly against. Their number one enemy is Amrullah Saleh, National Directorate Security. He was very effective against Pakistan. And of course, all the erstwhile Northern Alliance, for your kind information, even Bismillah Khan, the Turkish minister, is over there. He is
Right.
himself Tajik.
Okay.
And Amrullah Saleh is of course there, and then Ahmad Masood.
Okay.
Now, all these are hit targets for the Pakistan army, because they consider them as an enemy number one.
True.
So the overall gambit is what I am trying to explain, that we need not even seek confirmation. I am giving you 100% confirmed reports.
Oh,
And,
okay.
these are 200% reliable reports.
All right, General Meston, then the question arises, why is Panjshir so important for the Taliban and for the Pakistanis to fall? I'll come back to you on that one. Let me go across to my colleague Ravi Dhiman. Ravi, any update on the government formation now that reports are that Panjshir, if not completely fallen, has taken quite a severe blow?
Well, Amrit, what we can say is the real test for Taliban's inner strength is the government formation, because the government formation has been, we can say, it's been hit a roadblock ever since Taliban announced that they will be announcing
audio बहुत leak हो रहा है.
formation. But that has been postponed many times. And what we again hear is that there are conflicting claims within the Taliban to the top post, to the crucial portfolios, and that is what is still preventing the Taliban from announcing a government in Afghanistan. Now they have entire Afghanistan. Even before they launched an attack on the Panjshir Valley, they could have gone ahead and announced a government to at least get the economy cracking, at least get the country's administrative system going, restore some sanity, some system, and some thing in the larger nation. Right now, nothing seems to be working in Afghanistan, but still, the Taliban seems to be far, far away from announcing a formal government, because there seem to be no cohesion in different factions of Taliban.
Okay.
Now, we are getting conflicting reports that major factions are now, they want their pound of flesh. Haqqanis are at odds with Mullah Baradar being named the head of the government. the Taliban will head.
Okay.
And there are also reports that there could be many other claimants to the top post.
All right.
This is what is preventing them.
So the
US has already
officials,
said that Afghanistan could slip into a civil war. So this is the major test for the Taliban. It's a major, real crisis and real challenge, clear and present challenge for them.
All right, Ravi, many thanks for joining us and giving us that update. Let me go over to Ambassador Prabhu Dayal. Ambassador Dayal, I was asking that question which I'll also, after you answer that, take to General Meston. Why is the fall of Panjshir so important for Taliban? If, as you suggest that these reports are true, that the Pakistani Air Force was used or Pakistani SSG commandos were used, why is Panjshir so important to fall? I mean, in the last regime also, not all of Afghanistan, last regime of the Taliban, not all of Afghanistan was ruled by them. They controlled about 80-90% of the country. So why is Panjshir so important to fall?
Well, at least for two reasons. Firstly, because it is the last bastion of actual resistance to the Taliban.
Okay.
And secondly, because it is a very strategic area. It is difficult to conquer the Panjshir Valley. Now, the Taliban is being actively assisted by the Pakistanis. There are umpteen reports to indicate that the Pakistanis are directly involved in the Talibani onslaught on Panjshir. So that might tilt the scales in favor of the Taliban against the resistance which is coming from within Panjshir. But to answer your question, it is still not clear as to how far the Taliban have advanced in conquering, although there are some visual images I have seen which seem to indicate that the Taliban have indeed made deep inroads within Panjshir. But then, there is a lot of resistance which is still possible. So as I said, it is the last bastion of resistance, it is strategically located, and therefore the Taliban is launching this very heavy onslaught, in all likelihood with the assistance of the Pakistanis, to capture the Panjshir Valley.
Okay. General Meston, my same question to you. Why is the fall of Panjshir so important? Is the rise of Kabul hinging on the fall of Panjshir?
To some extent, yes. But more, why? I'll give you certain reasons why they consider it as strategically important to take Panjshir. One of the reasons I just highlighted earlier also, that for Pakistan Army and ISI, the foremost enemies are sitting in Panjshir itself. That is Amrullah Saleh, who was the chief of NDS initially, and of course Ahmad Shah Massoud's son, that is Ahmad Massoud, and Bismillah Khan. Now these are hardcore people who are deadly against Pakistan, so they would like to eliminate them. Second reason is that this has become the center for resistance, the center of gravity of resistance in Afghanistan. And if this is not taken care of by Taliban, the resistance movement will get impetus in other areas like Badakhshan, further towards the northeast, Legman, Nuristan. There were certain issues which had cropped up when Taliban had come, and within 1-2 days in Nangarhar, that is Jalalabad, which is the capital over there, in Kunar, and all these areas, there was a resistance movement building up. Similarly, now if this is not, taken care of by Taliban, so their fears are this will keep building on.
Oh, it might spread.
In
Okay.
the North Takhar and Badakhshan areas, and in the northeast. So this is their another fear. So they want to finish this resistance, because if one resistance is not curbed, this is going to be the birth of other resistance, and the resistance movement itself is going to be the main enemy of Pakistan and Taliban. Even women, their further resistance, like you saw in Kabul, they had come out, and in Herat also, they will also get emboldened in case this is not crushed. So therefore, that is another reason. Third is the strategic road passes through this one. The Salam tunnel is again connecting from here to the Madaris Sharif. So again, this becomes strategically important for them to take. And last but not the least is, they want to be in total domination, total control of all the 34 provinces, so that they can show that they are the supreme masters of entire Afghanistan, and there is no one who can face them and challenge their authority. So these are 4 or 5 strategic reasons which makes this area very, very important to Taliban and to Pakistan, and also vice versa. It is important to the national resistance movement and the other resistance movements.
Okay.
This is what in essence is the gist of the strategic issues.
Okay.
Of the relevance of Panjshir Valley.
General Meston, let me ask you as a military man, what is your assessment? Will Panjshir have to fall, because it's quite a different situation from the last time around when Ahmad Shah Massoud fought. He still had that Badakhshan corridor with him where there was an exit route, but this time around they've been surrounded from all sides. And as both of you, Ambassador Dayal and you, are saying that the Pakistanis are involved, so if their satellites etc. are involved and they are looking down at them, and Taliban has that pinpointed information where the resistance fighters are sitting, it will be easy for them to take them out. It might take a week or so. So what is your assessment as a military man? Is there still a chance that the resistance fighters could take back Panjshir, or is it just a matter of time that Panjshir will fall?
Yeah, it's a very pertinent question. My assessment is, earlier also in certain channels I had highlighted prior to this Air Force attack by Pakistan Air Force, that the terrain firstly favors the defender there, and more than the terrain, the local intelligence, because even when I had been there, I had met the people there and asked them how did they tackle the Russians, and their intelligence network was really excellent. So that was again quite a big advantage to these people. And terrain, of course, has its merits. More than that, it is the will, the leadership. I think, here there are 2 leaders who are standing behind with their foot soldiers. And, even Taliban in Pakistan was doing propaganda that they have fled to Tajikistan. Knowing Amrullah Saleh, know him personally, he will never do this. He will be there with his people. And let me tell you, they are very clear, they will fight last man, last round. Now, only very small portion of Panjshir Valley has fallen, that is the southern area. The balance of the valley is yet there, and these people are consolidating quite well. Their leadership, their morale, and sometimes, little defeat also incites you for further, fighting. So, my feeling is the resistance will last. Now, I will put it, earlier resistance also were very, very good, because see, they had support from Iran, India, Russia, Tajikistan. This is this time lacking. Probably now if Tajikistan wakes up, see, because the Tajik and the Badakhshan borders and all, they are quite open. So they can really help right now also. If this indirect or direct help comes from Tajikistan, I think it will give impetus to this thing. And simultaneously, international community, even if Americans are not interested, so be it. Let the other nations take a lead. We need to immediately stop this cross interference in, by the Pakistan Air Force and the army in other countries' affairs. If this should cease, I think then this resistance will long, very, very last. But if the international community turns a blind eye, permits the Pakistan, allows the Pakistan Air Force to go unhindered, I think then it is going to be problematic for the defenders.
But General, we see it looks like a problem. India can make whatever noises it wants to make. Iran can make those noises, but right now the international community, the international mood is that the Americans want to be out of it. Pakistan will claim deniability in that, and things are going the way they are going. That's what the situation looks like right now. Ambassador Prabhu, I'll give you the last question very quickly, because my producer tells me I'm totally out of time. What is holding up the formation of the government in Kabul, and how soon could we see a government in Kabul?
Well, from whatever I can make out, there is bickering going on between the Taliban and the Haqqani setup, because it is going to be a clamor for power. and the Haqqani network is not accepting the total sort of sway which the Taliban leaders want to have over the state of affairs in Afghanistan. So it might not be so easy to resolve this situation. As it is, Afghanistan has a history of bickering and fighting amongst the different factions and warlords. So we might well see this scenario playing out once again.
All right. Ambassador Prabhu Dayal and General Meston, many thanks for joining us and sharing your insights with us this evening. Thank you. And moving on, let's now take a look at the COVID-19 numbers from across the world. Well, the battle against COVID-19 continues. So far, more than 22.16 crore people have been infected with the virus, while over 19.81 crore patients have recovered till date worldwide. The deadly virus has claimed lives of more than 45.84 lakh people. The United States is witnessing spike in the new daily COVID-19 cases due to the Delta variant of the virus. More than 4.08 crore people in the country have tested positive for COVID-19, while over 6.66 lakh lives have been lost in the United States due to the virus. And schools in Bangladesh will reopen from September 12th after remaining closed for 18 months due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The decision to reopen schools was taken on Sunday during the interministerial meeting at the Cabinet Division in Dhaka. Education Minister Dr. Deepu Moni said that initially students of class 1 to 4th and 6th to 9th will attend classes once a week. Students appearing for the SSC and HSC examinations will attend classes on a daily basis. All the classes will be in offline mode and will begin in due course, the minister added. Everyone will be required to wear face masks and follow COVID-19 related health guidelines. The minister added that the decision may be changed if COVID situation deteriorates in the country. The decision about reopening of universities will be taken after holding a meeting with the authorities. They may open in October depending upon the vaccination status of students. As per the latest figures released by the Directorate General of Health Services, Bangladesh recorded 2,413 new cases and 70 deaths on Sunday. The number of active cases further declined to 36,830 with the recovery rate remaining at 95.81%. In the United States, many Louisiana residents are still struggling days after Hurricane Ida slammed the state. Even as the hurricane ended, they are trying to rebuild and move on amid widespread flooding, heat and continued power outages.
A week of torrential rains, floods and tornadoes in the United States has come to an end, but the remnants of Hurricane Ida continue to haunt people across the country. Houses are submerged underwater and many Louisiana residents still struggle as they try to rebuild and move on amid widespread flooding, heat and continued power outages. Authorities say that over 4,80,000 homes are still without power, while nearly 6 lakh customers are struggling without power and dangerous heat. Amid this, there is no respite. Louisiana Energy Department say that restarting timelines in New Orleans may take longer due to flooding and ongoing power supply issues. All the 8 transmission lines that deliver power to the city were knocked out of service when Ida struck. Hurricane Ida, that made a landfall on August 29 at a wind speed of 150 miles per hour, killed 11 in Louisiana. Ida also caused serious damage to New York State, which was also one of the hardest hit, with heavy rains lashing parts of the city and flooding low-lying areas. Around 11 people, mostly immigrants and low-income groups, were killed in New York City when floodwaters submerged basement apartments in the state, taking the toll to over 60 across the United States. While United States tries to pick up pieces following Ida, other countries too are bracing for significant challenges posed by climate change. In China, torrential rains that started on September 4th have wreaked havoc in country's southwest region, including Hongqing municipality. The rains also hit Taizhuang city in East China's Shandong province. Incessant rains uprooted trees and caused flooding in the low-lying urban and rural areas in the region. In India too, flooding continues in the state of Bihar. The central government team is visiting flood-affected areas of the state. Team is visiting the flood-hit districts of the state and will make on-the-spot assessment of the damage caused to public and private properties and crops. While many cities of the world are submerged underwater, Fires are raging in Brazil, which is battling wildfires, devouring hectares of land in Amazon jungle. Thick smoke billowed above the Amazon jungle as fire tore through the butchered rainforest and discarded trees. According to the government data, fires ramped up in the Brazilian rainforest in August, well above the historic average for the third consecutive year. Brazilian President Bolsonaro has been widely criticized for driving development in the Amazon jungle while working to weaken environmental protections. While scientists fear the rapid rate of destruction risks affecting climate, the Amazon is the world's largest rainforest and is seen as a vital bulwark against climate change. Climate change is battering humanity like never before, increasing frequency of natural calamities and urging mankind to ramp up its efforts to tackle the menace before it's too late. World Today Desk, DD India.
And let's now take a look at what else has been making headlines around the world in our segment, News at a Glance.
A self-described survivalist in body armor shot and killed 4 people, including a woman and her 3-month-old baby boy, in her arms before surrendering to police in Central Florida on Sunday. The shooter, identified as Brian Riley, 33 years of age, a former US Marine, also wounded an 11-year-old girl who underwent surgery for 7 gunshot injuries, Polk County Sheriff Grady Chutt told a news conference. Riley, who had no connection to the victims, engaged in a shootout with police before giving up and later tried to grab a police officer's gun while being treated in the hospital for his own gunshot wound before being subdued again. A veteran of the US wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, Riley was working as a bodyguard and a security guard. His girlfriend of 4 years told investigators that he suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder and occasional depression. About a week ago, his mental health worsened and he told his girlfriend that he had started speaking with God. South Africa's jailed former president Jacob Zuma has been granted medical parole. The 79-year-old is serving a 15-month sentence for contempt of court at Estcourt Correctional Centre. While the nature of his illness was not specified, Government's Correctional Services Department in a statement said that he would complete the rest of his sentence in the community under special conditions. Zuma has been in hospital for the past month where he has undergone surgery and he will remain there until discharged. Special Forces soldiers who staged an uprising in Guinea's capital on Sunday said that they had dissolved the West African nation's government and constitution and closed all land and air borders. Guinean soldiers claim that they have overthrown the long-serving president Alpha Condé in an apparent military coup less than a year after he won his 3rd term. A fighting broke out near the presidential palace on Sunday morning, with several sources saying an elite National Army unit led by a former French legionnaire, Mamadi, was behind the unrest. While country's defense ministry said in a statement that security forces had stopped the attempted coup after heavy gunfire erupted near the palace. As the United Nations and Nigeria condemned any takeover by the force, Army unit's head Mamadi said that poverty and endemic corruption had driven his forces to remove the president from the office. World Today Desk, DD India.
And let's now take a look at stories from the Tokyo Paralympics that concluded on Sunday with a historic feat for the country. India bagged a total of 19 medals, including 5 golds at the Tokyo Paralympics. It's been a record performance by a long stretch because the previous best was 4 medals at the Rio Games in 2016. The PM described these games as a sporting landmark for the country, while Union Sports Minister said that it has been a downpour of medals during the monsoons.
India registered its largest ever medal haul at the Tokyo Paralympic Games, finishing with 5 gold, 8 silver and 6 bronze. With the total of 19 medals, India went past its previous best tally of 4 medals at the 2016 Games in Rio de Janeiro. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has described the Tokyo Paralympics as a landmark event for India. In a series of tweets, he said, "In the history of Indian sports, the Tokyo Paralympics will always have a special place. The Games will remain etched in the memory of every Indian and will motivate generations of athletes to pursue sports. India won its first medal of the Games through Bhavini Patel, who brought home silver in table tennis women's singles class 4, while Krishna Nagar won gold in badminton men's singles SH6 to end India's campaign in style on the last day of the Games. Indian shooters brought home 2 gold medals and 5 in total. Avani Lakhera and Singaraj Adana won 2 medals each. India shone in athletics as well, with 4 medals in high jump, 3 in javelin throw and 1 in discus throw. Javelin thrower Sumit Until secured the only athletics gold medal at the Tokyo Paralympics for India. India also had a good outing in badminton, which was being played at the Paralympics for the first time this year. Pramod Bhagat and Krishna Nagar both won gold as Indian shuttlers brought home 4 medals in total. Union Sports Minister Anurag Singh Thakur said that India has won remarkable medals in Tokyo 2020 Paralympics as the total strength of the contingent. This is phenomenal rise of our Paralympians and a new sporting era has begun.
If you compare it with the 2016 19-member contingent, today we have won 19 Olympic medals, Paralympic medals. It clearly showcases India has done well. Our medal has increased, say, about 5 times. It's a big achievement. A big congratulations to all the athletes.
India had gone into the Games with an unprecedented contingent of 54 athletes and took part in 9 sporting disciplines. While India has registered its largest ever medal haul at the Tokyo Paralympic Games, the Indian para-athletes also made some remarkable records. Sumit Until made world record in F64 men's javelin. Avani Lakhera equaled the world record and made a Paralympic record in R2 women's 10-meter air standing SH1. Manish Narwal made Paralympic record in P4 mixed 50-meter pistol SH1. Nishat Kumar made Asian record in men's high jump T47. Praveen Kumar broke Asian record in men's high jump T64. Since making its first appearance at the Paralympics in 1968, India had won 12 medals in total till the 2016 Rio edition. It has now dramatically improved its performance at the Tokyo Paralympics 2020. India finished 24th in the overall medal tally. Sports Desk, DD India.
Para-table tennis player Bhavina Patel, who opened the medal tally for India at Tokyo Paralympics, was received with a very warm welcome at the airport. Bhavina Patel bagged a silver medal in the para-table tennis event at Tokyo Paralympics. The Tokyo 2020 Paralympics concluded on Sunday with dazzling fireworks display and crowds gathering outside the National Stadium to catch a glimpse of the closing ceremony. To echo the restraint of the Games being held during a global health crisis, the Paralympics closing ceremony was staged without spectators. Fireworks lit up the night sky just after the Olympic flame was extinguished. The Paralympics, the world's biggest event for specially abled athletes, began on August 24th after the daily number of COVID infections repeatedly reached record levels in Tokyo and elsewhere in the country and ended on 5th of September. The next edition of the Summer Olympics and Paralympics is scheduled for 2024 in Paris. England, Poland and Germany scored big wins in the World Cup qualifiers on Sunday, where England beat Andorra 4-0. Poland won 7-1 at San Marino and Germany defeated Armenia 6-0. In other matches, Belgium defeated the Czech Republic, while Wales beat Belarus 3-2 with a hat-trick from Gareth Bale to keep their World Cup qualification hopes alive.
England marked their return to Wembley for the first time since their Euro 2020 final heartbreak by seeing off Minows Andorra 4-0 on Sunday to preserve their perfect World Cup qualifying record. Jesse Lingard scored twice and substitute Harry Kane netted from the spot before a late goal from Bukayo Saka as England made it 5 wins from 5 matches in Group I on the road to Qatar 2022. On the other hand, captain Harry Kane scored through a penalty in the 72nd minute. Saka gave the team victory in the 85th minute by scoring the 4th goal for the English team. Wales kept their hopes of qualifying for the World Cup alive after beating Belarus by 3-2 in a thrilling match. For Wales, captain Gareth Bale played a key role in the team's victory by scoring a hat-trick. Bale scored 2 goals via penalties in the 5th and 69th minutes. However, till the last moments of the match, both the teams were running at 2-2. In the extra time of the second half, Bale scored a goal to give the team victory. Romelu Lukaku marked his 100th cap with an early goal to set Belgium on their way to an impressive 3-0 win over the Czech Republic in their World Cup qualifier in Brussels on Sunday. It was Lukaku's 67th goal for his country and came after 8 minutes, followed by a second from captain Eden Hazard 4 minutes before half-time. Substitute Alexis added a third with 25 minutes left to play to underline Belgium's top place in the FIFA rankings and extend to 29 games their unbeaten home record. Poland registered a stunning 7-1 win over San Marino in the World Cup qualifier. Star striker Robert Lewandowski scored 2 goals for Poland. At the same time, Buksa played an important role in the team's victory by putting a hat-trick. With this win, Poland is scored only to England in Group I with 10 points. Midfielder Serge Gnabry scored 2 early goals as Germany rediscovered their form in front of goal to hammer Armenia by 6-0 and go top of World Cup qualifying Group J with 12 points from 5 games. Gnabry netted twice in the opening 15 minutes with Marco Rios and Timo Werner both scoring before the break as they dismantled the Armenian defence with clever passing and deft flicks. Jonas Hoffmann added a 5th 7 minutes after the break with a low bouncing drive, and substitute Karim Ademi put the icing on the cake with a goal on his international debut to make it 6-0 in second half stoppage time. Spain got back to winning ways as they thrashed Georgia 4-0 in their Group B World Cup qualifying meeting. Jose Gaya, Carlos Soler and Ferran Torres put the host in control with their 3 first half strikes as they showed no hangover from a first World Cup qualifying defeat in 28 years, last time out against Sweden. Pablo Sarabia added another after the break as Luis Enrique's side cruised to 3 points. Spain moved back top of the group with 10 points from 5 games, 1 ahead of Sweden, who have 2 games in hand. Sports Desk, DD India.
And in football, let's talk about Cristiano Ronaldo, who made one of the biggest moves to Manchester United from Juventus. Somewhat of a homecoming for the player, and fans too are eagerly waiting to see him in action in the jersey of Manchester United. Let's take a look at how financially the move became even more bigger than for both Ronaldo and Man U in our next report.
Ronaldo's 4-year contract with Juventus, worth $64 million a year, came to a halt, and Ronaldo made a swift yet profitable move towards the Reds, the Manchester United. As his manager, Massimiliano Allegri confirmed, Cristiano gave his contribution, he made himself available, and now he leaves and life goes on. Big number. If we look at the numbers, Cristiano Ronaldo has earned $120 million in the past year. That makes him the 3rd highest paid athlete in the world, coming in just after boxer Conor McGregor and Argentinian soccer star Lionel Messi. With this, Ronaldo also became the first athlete to exceed $1 billion in career earnings. However, as soon as the news circulated on Cristiano Ronaldo's transfer to Manchester United, Manchester United's New York listed share rose 7%, valuing the club at more than $3 billion by market capitalization. Key background. Let's take a look at key achievements of Ronaldo. Cristiano Ronaldo is a 5-time Ballon d'Or winner. Ronaldo has so far won over 30 major trophies during his career. This also includes 5 UEFA Champions League titles, 4 FIFA Club World Cups, 7 league titles in England, Spain and Italy, and the European Championship for his native Portugal. In his first spell for Manchester United, Cristiano Ronaldo scored 118 goals in 292 games. Ronaldo first joined Manchester United as a teenager, the first club he played for outside of his native Portugal, and it's been 12 years since Ronaldo left the English club, where he scored 118 goals in 292 games over 6 years and helped Manchester United win the 3 Premier League titles and the Champions League in the year 2008. Cristiano Ronaldo then transferred to Spanish club Real Madrid in 2009 in a $110 million deal, a record-breaking figure at the time, and then went on to Juventus in the year 2018. With his coming back to the Reds, the Manchester United fans are all excited to see Ronaldo in action, which can be a possibility on 11th of September in their Premier League clash against Newcastle. Till then, fans will have to wait with bated breath. Sports Desk, DD India.
And let's now take a look at what all happened on this day in history.
On this day in 1901, 25th US President William McKinley was shot by the anarchist Leon Czolgosz while attending the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. He died 8 days later. In the year 1914, on this day in World War I, the First Battle of the Marne began along a 300-mile front when the French launched a counter-offensive against a German advance. On this day in 1966, Hendrik Verwoerd, who was South Africa's Prime Minister since 1958, was stabbed to death in Parliament by Dimitri Safendas, a parliamentary messenger. On this day in 1968, Swaziland became independent. In the year 1970, on this day, Palestinian guerrillas hijacked 4 planes heading for New York from Europe. One Pan Am jumbo jet was blown up the next day in Cairo, and 2 Boeing 707s that landed in Jordan were blown up on September 12th. On this day in 1997, Britain's Princess Diana was buried on the grounds of her family home. On this day in 2007, the Italian opera star Luciano Pavarotti, whose titanic voice and charisma brought opera to the masses, died of cancer at the age of 71.
That's it then in World Today. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.